Thanks so much for joining us today. As I was saying just 2 seconds ago, I think this whole issue of collaboration is vitally interesting and vitally important. And now I'll just kick off with you. I mean, so what is this all about? What is this about partnerships? And what are you seeing with partnerships happening in industry at the moment?
There's a lot going on. If I can, I'll go back to a story of actually when I first met Bertrand, which is about 2 years ago, and I'd moved to London from California. And Bertrand asked a pretty simple question, which is, what do interesting leading technology companies do that we could learn from? Which I think is a very, very wise question. One of the things that came out of that discussion was that most technology software companies tend to have a very official role for partnerships and alliances that's at the C-suite. And it's just a given that that's one of the most important things you're going to do, because you're going to innovate, you're going to use partners for go-to-market, for distribution. And one of the things the reason I remember that conversation is because if you actually look around most executive teams in Fortune 500 that are non-technology companies, partnerships sometimes happens, but it doesn't seem to be the same level of elevation and importance. So that's how the discussion got started. And I think that fundamentally, so that's the background, at least anecdotally. I think fundamentally, if you look at a lot of our clients, one of the things that is absolutely true is they won't digitally transform alone. There's just too much going on. There's just too much pinpoint innovation in certain pockets where people have dedicated their life to not understanding the machine, but understanding one specific screw of that machine. And they've raised $100 million, and all they care about is that one screw. You're just not going to get that level of knowledge from managing the machine. So we see partnerships as being one of the most important capabilities going forward. It's
very interesting because I think in traditional companies, it's not so much partners they have, it's suppliers, right? So you make chocolate bars or whatever, you've got suppliers who give you cocoa beans and milk and whatever, but you don't really have partnerships in that sense, or you've got relationships with retailers. It's very interesting. And Bertrand, so what's your, how do you begin a transformation that relies on technology? Can you go it alone in your experience? Obviously not, but what's your thoughts on that?
So you know the answer.
Exactly. That's the best questions when you already know the answer.
No, I don't think you can go alone. But to me, it started maybe in an industry where I used to work a while ago in the music business, which is an industry that was known for being pirated for 10 years and trying to protect itself and really play the legal battle as much as possible. And I remember very, very specifically also a story on Saul Klein from Index being on stage at one of the music industry of saying, guys, we don't want to work with you anymore. We're not going to fund any startup or any meaningful business that is depending on you rights holders, basically, of music holders, so big major labels. I was at EMI at the time, which struck a chord with me because you try to have those conferences where you try to portray as cool as we want to work actually with the young startups that are in there. So we try to get to the bottom of what does he really mean? What is really the issue here? So we got a few VCs, a few managers from artists, a few startups in the business to try to understand, and took them for 3 hours in our boardroom. And I have to admit, the first hour and a half was pretty cruel and tough because we're treated as kind of the enemy that didn't want to collaborate, that was just extracting as much fees and royalties as we could actually from those startups and asking them for 5-10 million ticket even before they could get started to work with us. Which in fairness, we recognize a lot of what it was in a tough industry that was highly challenged and that had been suffering from a digital point of view. So the next hour and a half was much more interesting because there we tried to understand what could we do with you? What would be a model of partnership that would work for you? And they started, especially the startup guys, started to describe to us the type of assets that would be jewels to them. Because especially in the music space, you get a lot of things like the lyrics, the associated videos, the thought of the artist that went into the music itself, some unique shots that they have. So we started putting a little something together, sort of an API tab, but for music, and in a sandbox saying who would be the artists that we have among the 600 we have on the roster. We contacted about 20, 30 that were more progressist and more forward-looking of what could we do together. And then we put a bunch of their assets into a sandbox. You have a lot of stakeholders around the room because you have to explain to the artist, to some other artists and to some management, like, don't worry, it's a sandbox, it's closed, there are gates. If anyone abuses of those rights and your property and your creativity, will close those gates at the back of it. So it was quite a journey. I don't want to pretend that it was an easy one, but it took 6-7 months to really get that together. But once we have it, gosh, the power of that, the power of the number of startups that starting to get around the room, and someone described it earlier, what a music label does well is actually to the marketing side of it, because when you represent Katy Perry, you have 50 million fans behind. A startup couldn't do that on day one. And we're pretty good at the time at clearing the rights, which is a pretty onerous and difficult task to do. Versus a startup, we're much better from a product experience point of view, from back to the previous panel, from designing the experiences that really make sense. And to me, that struck a chord because within 6 months after that, the way it accelerated was we got 50 startups that started interacting with the content, more and more artists wanted to be part of it, started to really have creations and products that we got out there that were very, very compelling on the back of it. And then it created a mindset of collaboration, a mindset of, I'm not saying by any means that the music industry has still found the full keys on that, but of being more open to the Spotify of this world, to the Deezers of this world and all that. So to me, there is a cultural piece, but where that was a prime example to me of seeing what the power of those collaboration could be.
That's very, very interesting. And so I mean, you know, if one stands back a little bit and just asks, you know, what kind of organisations are doing these sorts of collaborations, and which ones should be doing them, basically?
I think most of them should be doing them. There's some data that came out last year that was kind of interesting that said, I mean, so let's talk about why you want to do these partnerships. There's many different reasons you want to do partnerships, and not just with startups, but with tech companies. You know, there might be an interesting partnership for your industry and people at Apple, Amazon, Google, or whoever. But just for startups for a moment, the data said that last year in the US, there was about $845 billion spent on innovation, corporate innovation. This includes things like science, R&D labs, AT&T, Bell Labs. It includes corporate VC. It includes M&A, and then it includes innovation, corporate innovation. And the entire US venture capital industry last year was about 76 billion, right? So about 10 times less. And so you have to look at that and saying, keeping aside the pure science part of it, which is invaluable, and large companies do a phenomenal job with universities, 1 to 10 times, and you would argue that the venture capital industry, despite a lot of the hype and things like that, has potentially produced more innovation than 10 times more investment. And it does beg the question, for most companies, does corporate innovation work? It also challenges the notion that more money means more innovation, right? It definitely challenges the notion that most corporate VCs have a median life in our analysis of about 19 months, right? So
19 months, that's interesting.
19, yeah. So the data suggests that there's always exceptions to various companies doing great innovation, but in general, the data suggests that corporate innovation is highly a questionable endeavor for shareholders. So
that's both fascinating and depressing.
Welcome to my life.
We've passed the 19 months just now, so I feel better. Or in danger.
You survived. You survived. But the idea that you're going to out-innovate a startup on a feature is mostly ridiculous, right? They've got the benefit of focus. They've got the benefit of investors that don't need them to make money. That's all they sort of do. So the organizations that most benefit from it truly are the organizations that keep talking about innovation but have internal projects that don't go anywhere. It feels like to us. I think the other aspect of this thing is that there's different ways you can engage with startups, and we can come back to talking about different models. But I think fundamentally, this partnership approach that says a large corporation should stop worrying about organic innovation internally and start being almost an integrator of third-party innovation, where you can provide the distribution, the scale, the understanding of licensing, the understanding of regulations. I mean, just ask large tech companies that thought they could go into China alone. You know, local market knowledge matters a lot. You know, ask transportation companies that are having issues with the regulator. Understanding law matters a lot. So there's a massive benefit between these two parties, but the marriage is not always easy.
And Bertrand, what's your experience of that and thoughts on that?
Especially that last point. I think I'm not just thinking about feature, and I'm related to a point that I think Stan Laurent made earlier, which is a lot of it is prioritization. And to me, because to some extent you have the other effect as well, which is we're swamped with all sorts of innovation where we could go in all sorts of directions. So the more time goes by, the more I try as much as possible to tie it back to what is really core to the business. And then so that you don't go in all directions as well just for the sake of it, of building a funnel for the sake of it. This being said, I think afterwards, it's really about what are the skills that we bring to the party, where do we have weaknesses as a business. I'm talking about, take Argos for example, we're really about at home retail, we are a convenience business. We have points of presence across the network, we're very easy in and out. We're never going to pretend, however, that we're a shop where, like a John Lewis, where you come to shop around. We don't have products, so we shouldn't try to pretend that. But we've done a major partnership, for example, with eBay on the back of that, which was eBay is doing home deliveries for their customers. However, they don't have the convenience of click and collect. So there it's like, okay, we each have strengths that we can bring to the party. We each have different type of customer sets that we love to be able to talk to each other on that front. So we started with a small innovation piece. It's not a startup, obviously. It's a broader startup eBay. And on using 50 of our stores, they took 50 of their merchants on their side and saying, could we just put it up? And even in a working basically prototype, a minimum viable product on there. The numbers were actually pretty good. eBay is able to scale very quickly. We have some scale as well, at least nationwide in the UK. And then we tried on 150 stores, then we expanded to 750 stores fairly rapidly. And then they use that as a default where every single one of their merchants now, by default, gets activated as having a collection point within Argos, which is usually less than 10 miles away as a customer on that. So I think it's really a win from a customer point of view. And that to me is a good example of partnership that I'm proud of, because it was really something that is core to us. We're known for convenience. eBay has a need on that front. We have a need as well towards a customer base. How do we bring it together and scale it within a year?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, you wouldn't have seen, I doubt you would have seen that kind of thing in the retail world at any point in the past few decades before.
Especially before, we started 4 years ago, the mindset was eBay is a competitor, Amazon is a competitor,
exactly,
so
yes.
we're going to just fight them.
Yes.
So it was more, how do we...
It's blurring the distinction between competitor and partner, basically.
Also I think there's a recognition, and this is just the arrogance of the tech community in Silicon Valley. I think there's a recognition that brick and mortar matters a lot, like a lot, right? I mean, the idea of digital experiences and offline, online, these are meaningless industry boundaries for a user, right? Their experience is seamless. And I think, with the recent announcements of Amazon stores and this and that, I think what you're going to see is most of the tech giants are starting to appreciate what part of the physical assets they would really love to have, which is, I think, Bertrand's point about the fact that eBay probably didn't think they would have needed that functionality 5 or 10 years ago, because there is a general bravado that says it's all digital. Yes. It's actually not true.
Yes, yes. And what kind of sectors or organisations are resisting this sort of stuff still, do you think?
It goes back to your point just earlier, which is you can start with the mindset of we are all competitors. So I think it starts with the mindset of where could we collaborate, what would be the type of partners that are core to our business where we can effectively scale on the back of it. I think it's the previous panel talked about bringing the right type of profiles on board at all levels. I think it really bubbles up, and at the same time, you cannot just kid yourself. You also need it at the right senior level as well to have the right sponsorship across all of it. My firm belief as well is like you have two ways of doing this. Either you do that outside of the organization, as some were talking about earlier in the Visa example, or you do that within the core.
You mean physically outside?
I
but
mean,
still part of it?
Still part of it,
yes.
yeah. But you try to isolate.
Different office or whatever.
I can relate to that, but I think as quickly as possible you need to bring it back in, because otherwise it's meant to, at least I've known some areas where we didn't manage to make it work by bringing too much separate from the business. And then you have to pick a few victories, and then once you have those, to really, to celebrate those and to scale those. But there's no magic. The entire organization the weight of the organization is against you on those, so you have to start from that point. In our case, I think what we had going for us at Home Retail, or at Argos in particular, was that we knew that we were threatened 4 years ago. So there was a sense of urgency that was pretty big, and that gave us more risk appetite, I would say.
Is that one of the criteria that you need, a sense of urgency?
Yeah, and that sense of urgency could be your CEO. But yeah, I think absolutely. I would also say I'm not so sure there is a resistance in general. There is a resistance to, the mothership will reject antibodies. That is always true. But there is a general lack of understanding as to how to engage, which I think is very solvable. So, people talk about innovation, and people talk about setting up all these different incubators and accelerators which have their purpose, and when they work, it's fantastic. But fundamentally, if you actually start with a very simple premise that says, let's just start with what matters the most to your business, and I'm making some stuff up. So let's just say you define one of the problems as being, converting mobile traffic to your store is going to be a huge value driver for you guys. And so that's your innovation topic. You can very easily find 30 or 40 startups at different stages that solve the mobile offline online conversion video problem, or the shopping cart abandonment analytics problem, because conversion online is going to kill you if you don't increase it. These are very tangible things. So if you find So I think what's lacking is a very systematic process that says, this is not voodoo, you don't have to be a hipster in thin jeans. Just basically figure out what are the 4 or 5 things that matter to your business, and then scan. So we scan 110,000 startups.
110,000?
Yeah, and we scan them, not just who invested in them and who, but we scan them based on what they do, right? So this species of startups does a wonderful conversion of abandoned shopping carts and increases sales by 1 to 3%, right? That's how we tag them. So if our clients come to us and saying, we've got these 4 or 5 problems, we can narrow it down and find the startups that matter. That helps, because suddenly it's not this big, vague, ambiguous idea. It's a very tangible set of companies. Then the question becomes, once you've done the scanning, then the question becomes, how do you engage? And most of our clients are very enthusiastic and things like that. And then you find out that the corporate machinery becomes, sometimes challenging. So we've had stories where our clients, and Bertrand has an unusual background, which makes this probably, I think, easier for Argos. But I think for in general, if you actually look at this, you'll say, great, I want to partner with the startup. And the startup will come back to us and saying, you got to help because the NDA took 47 days, right? And most of our clients are like, I don't understand the problem, that's pretty quick. So, you've got an impedance mismatch.
Yes.
So the first thing is a scanning problem, which is highly solvable if you stop using words like innovation and start talking business language. And then the second problem is the engagement problem. But I don't think there's a resistance.
You don't think there's a resistance from which side? From the startups?
I don't think people are saying, well, startups are resistant because they're terrified of long sales cycles, and they're terrified of being, used as education bait.
Yes.
To amuse the C-suite and tell them all the great things that are happening, and nothing happens, right? Silicon Valley is littered with, corporate tourism and
that's a nice phrase. I like that.
Digital safaris that go nowhere.
It's another good phrase. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you've got, and I was
He's a consultant.
I know. I'm a journalist.
You are. Oh gosh.
I'm actually, but I was on the other side, and I'm actually, you're right, I'm a consultant, but I'm also a recovering entrepreneur.
Right.
And I think
You're forgiven.
But the interesting thing is, we'd be on the other side, and we'd get told by our board, you've got to meet this large company that's coming from Europe, and we'd be like, they're not going to do anything. Why are we wasting our time? And they're like, well, So it's the startups, there's a resistance because of all the obvious reasons. Large companies actually there's a huge sense of optimism that we have, because once you explain this process in very simple steps and you show them what's worked, you show them why a GM would invest in a lift, you show them why a JP Morgan would do a distribution partnership with OnDeck for small and medium loans. You show them why the acquisition of Accor by One Fine Stays makes perfect sense. There's actually plenty of examples, and one of the interesting data points is that from 2012 to 2016, the percentage of non-tech acquisitions and partnerships with companies like GM and Lyft has grown up about 263%. And Mary Meeker talked about this recently. And that's about 30 billion spent on just this bridge. So there's massive reasons for optimism.
And Bertrand, do you think the corporate culture in the UK and in London is ripe for the kinds of partnerships that one needs to see? Because I mean, obviously, I'm asking you that as someone who's just done that in a long-established company.
I think so. I think it's really. I don't see any reason why the UK would be behind on that. If anything, there is a lot of entrepreneurial blood all around. So to us to surround us.
Or you're ahead maybe of other places. I mean, that's also possible, of course.
I don't think so. I don't think it's just a geographic point. I think it's more the DNA of the company and having a few that are probably at the right place plus the right bubbling that can effectively get there. My view as well is like it's not only, I mean, from an innovation point of view, you can partner. So, and part of it is strategic view, is where do you partner because you're not going to be able to get that feature, or you cannot get actually that part of it, or where do you need to acquire, and where do you need to do it yourself. But I think it really starts with the key strategic question at first, which is what are the key assets that we have in our company that we should leverage? To me, one that struck me over the past 3 years was, look, we had 750 Argos stores. I came in this country as a Belgium where everybody was asking me, why are you joining Argos? Is that the store with the little pens and the little lottery tickets and you're playing bingo? I was like, oh my God, what did I sign for? But it was fantastic. So I mean, a lot of you guys were also a bit critical about the stores, about saying, there's a liability probably in the store estate, everybody's moving online. I'm ex-Amazon, so I can probably relate to that. But then we thought pretty hard about what are the assets that are unique to us. And one of them was we have a good single view of stock, so we know where our stock is at any point in time. And actually we have, if you flip that and you look at our stores as being depot and almost little warehouses in all over the country and nationwide, which Amazon doesn't have, for example, to that extent, then we started to think about that, of saying, well, actually we're very close to customers and we could ship things around very quickly. So we reshaped our network of store in a model of what we call the hub and spoke. We talked about those in the early days. And essentially 1 in 6 stores, roughly, so 1/60 of our stores became a hub where we didn't change the store as such, but we changed all the technology that was behind so that it could really contain the entire inventory of items of product that we had for customers. And then the neighboring one was serving 5 little spokes around, so that we were started by doing 3 rotations a day from those big hubs to those little spokes. We didn't need to have as much stock in the little spokes because we could put that in the hubs because they could contain the entire inventory. We could have more of the fast moving in the spokes, better customer experience for everybody, and then we organized the rotations. When we started having that, then the partnership discussion started coming in of saying, actually, once we have that, and we have a little depot, what about doing a partnership with TfL, for example, in the tube station? And we talked about it at the break. At Cannon Street here, we have a little Argo store, which is probably the size of this stage, twice the size of this stage, where now we can serve it from those hubs on the back of it. We started having our sister company, Homebase, starting to put 100 stores into their stores as well because we had too much space over there on that front. And then on the back of it, I mean, we even did a partnership with the likes of Sainsbury, where we put some of our stores basically in there. And so quite a few that came on the back of that. But it was from identifying fairly early on what our key assets were. And to me, then we got some surprise on the way as well. That's something we didn't have on the roadmap when we started. But once we now have those little vans that are doing the tour 3 times a day from our hubs to those little spokes, well, we have customers in between. So why not serving those customers? Stan was talking earlier about shipping cards to his auntie you order by 7 p.m., you get it next day. Well, we beat that now. I'm very proud of that. Tried. Where if you order all the way to 6 p.m., we'll be with you at home between 7 and 10 p.m. because we ship from those local basic distribution
up to now,
centers.
basically. I mean, a minimum of an hour.
Which is really an hour delivery almost, same-day delivery very, very rapidly on the back of that. So it was really from which partnership do you pick, how are you ready, what are the assets that you have that are ripe for partnership, how do you avoid going in all directions, and do you really focus on those where you can nail it.
And do you generally think, Nari, do you think how widespread is the understanding of this now, do you think, across the corporate scene, and how, are people kind of clambering to your door and trying to smash your door down for assistance on this?
I think it's hard to say, but I mean, it varies by industry. I think certain people have been voluntarily looking up to partnerships. I think others have had to respond. I think in financial services, fintech, I guess is on people's minds because they're kind of coming at them from different bits and pieces. Certain industries have had a wake-up call for partnerships, like the self-driving car and automotive, right? It's just that you cannot not have an answer right now because the tech people have forced you into it, right? It's not that they were rushing into self-driving cars themselves. Others are, I think...
I suppose it's a question whether the new car makers actually have the right skills also to make these new cars. I suppose it goes both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, which is why you're seeing some phenomenally interesting partnerships right now between the automotive industry and the tech giants. I mean, time will tell if, which DNA will work and how that will all come together. But at least the intention is there. So I think it varies by industry, but I think over the next 3 or 4 years, we're absolutely predicting that this bridge will become a much more important part of your corporate strategy.
Interesting. And what sort of, if you were to give some advice to people in the room, I quite like advice, it's good. What sort of, let's say there's people here who are trying to kind of work on those sorts of things. What would be the key things you'd focus on in terms of trying to make it work? I mean, obviously you've explained about the assets and so on. I meant more about what should you do to identify that you need a partnership, and then to change organisation, and then to actually make sure that one of those partnerships actually happens.
46-day NDAs would be a start,
right?
Not 47. In all seriousness, I think you have to organize to be partner ready, which is obvious. But I mean, back to Bertrand's point. I mean, partner for what? For what purpose? I think it does start with the fundamental premises. How do you want to play in your industry? How do you want to compete? What parts of the experience layer do you want to own? what will be not negotiable, what do you want to keep inside. So there's all that stuff that is actually critical. But once you do that, then I think you have to be partner ready. And I think what that really means is, do you understand what assets you have, even though you didn't think they were valuable? So, we've sat down, this happened a few months ago, we sat down with a large transportation company, and they were talking about different assets and capabilities, and one of the things that came up, they have a venture which is a little bit like Uber for fleet, for trucks and things like that. And there's a lot of reasons for why that's a good idea in their position. And one of the things that came up was that, very casually that came up, was that one of the things they had from the 70s was a partnership that they did that gave them all the information about billing stations in the US where you actually weigh your trucks and your lorries. There's weighing stations. And it turns out that's invaluable information, because I can actually tell you how much load capacity you have available in the truck, which means optimization much easier. They didn't think that was important. They're like, yeah, we did this deal with the International Fuel Agreement Trade Organization or something. Is that useful? We're like, really, quite useful. And they're like, oh, okay, well, there you have it. So I think there's the other thing is, which is, what assets do you not know that you have that are going to be critical because you have entrenched beliefs as an incumbent, and the digital world requires slightly different assets. So there's plenty of ways to get started.
Probably the reason, forgive me to be single-minded really on that, but the reason why I go strong on the assets is, like, the example of the NDA is a good one, because that's one that we all should shift pretty quickly, and that's deep in the DNA. However, even if you have the best mindset in the world and the will actually to really make the DNA type of problems basically disappear, there are some that actually are really, really deep. To change those hubs that I was talking about, it took us 2 years to do that. So it takes a will at the beginning to say, are we really we have the appetite? Are we going to convince our PLC? What kind of bets are we going to make? Because you have to be ready for a 2-year journey without in-market scrutiny as well on a quarterly basis, but with an absolute deep conviction of those are the ones that are going to allow us to do those type of partnership. Yeah. Nari and I worked on something together 3 years ago, which was when we started this, which was, well, it's all good and well to talk about, to get introduced to a lot of startups, but then if we cannot honor them because they come and then we don't have the technology because we're stuck on an old piece of legacy systems where we can have the best conversation, even intellectually be completely on the same wavelength, strategically it's completely in our core, but we cannot attach them properly, then it becomes difficult. That's the genius of a Bezos. He recognized that fairly early on. He built the entire infrastructure inside on, he called it, anyone who doesn't use APIs would be a criminal offense already in 2003. We're all only waking up to that 3 years ago. We had a big thing that we called Tech Co. How do we shift from becoming purely seen as a retailer to a technology company so that we can be partnership ready as well on the back of that? So that's why I don't want to minimize to the example of the DNA. I think there are some others that really take 2-3 years to change, and the capital and the PLC that is backing you and the market that is backing you. But for that, it means you cannot, it's DNA, but you also have to back 3 or 4 big bets. There's probably as many as that as we can take to really go in one direction.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much for that. Let's open the floor for questions, because I think there are lots of fascinating points here. So who would like to kick off? Someone is going to put their hands up and ask a very interesting question. Who is that person going to be? Come on. You've got 2 great transformation experts. There you go. Right. First, the gentleman over there, please. If you could just quickly tell us your name and position. Thank you.
It's Nathan Marsh from EY. I lead our Smart and Digital Cities practice in the UK. And a question that we're kind of wrestling with clients, I'd love to hear the panel's view on, is we see that tech innovation and user preference is coming on quite nicely. How worried are you that innovation in governance and ethics, legal and commercial, procurement, some of the commercial and corporate structures, the funding mechanisms, is keeping pace with that innovation? Or is there a risk that technology could be moving so quickly it becomes innovative and exciting but unsafe?
It's a great question. I don't know, to be honest. I think there's a risk of innovation anarchy, but we haven't seen that being a real risk in the near future yet, right? I mean, I in a way almost think that would be an interesting problem to solve. But I think that what we have seen is certain functions are a little bit more not as open, or for whatever reasons, to innovation. And I'm not pointing out too many specifics, but let me point out one. HR, right? So if you look at what's happened with the chief marketing officer in the last 10 years, right? The chief marketing officer's DNA has had to change from being fundamentally more on the creative agency management side to being quant, to being data analytics driven, understanding where PPC and optimization media mixes. And most CMOs joined because, they didn't like math. And that's happening with HR, right? I mean, if you look at the HR analytics and the amount you can tell about your employee engagement that has nothing to do with a survey is mammoth. But you need to have receiving organizations and antenna and capabilities to understand how to interpret those signals. So I do see differences in certain functions, but I don't know if I have an answer to your innovation anarchy question.
Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
I can relate to what you're talking. There might be a risk of two speeds on that, but I'm seeing the government innovating in quite a few areas. At least with an initiative together on how do we help digitalize the high street that we're sponsoring. It's an interesting one because it's different pace, and you're on goodwill by trying to get a bunch of corporates together and the governments together. Yeah. As soon as multi-partner will move at different speed, it makes it trickier. But we've done a few things on which I'm proud of. You have to pick your battles on which one where you can move the dial most. And at the same time, we're seeing the government pick up quite a few ambassadors from the space, from transformation, from digital in general, that are starting to make a dent as well on that front. So it's a question of, I guess, picking your battles and while having a long way to go.
Great, thank you. Next question. I think you were the next person. Could you just tell us quickly who you are? Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. My name is Jean Laloff. I'm head of digital design at Goldman Sachs in Europe. And earlier you mentioned that one of the things that companies need to do is start becoming integrators for the partnerships, for strategic partnerships. Is there a risk there, however, that you might wind up, basically what do you do with the folks who are still in your organization? Because if you make it seem like all the cool, innovative value add is coming from outside the firm, the folks who are still in the firm just become integrators. And that's great, but might be devaluing somehow?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. I think there's two or three different responses you can have to innovation that's happening outside your industry and what you want to do with it. How do you want to engage? By the way, deciding to ignore innovation is also a decision that you can make. I think the other one would be to actually be a third-party integrator, and I'll come back to what that really means for your staff. The other one, which is what you guys have done, is get into the business yourself and try to beat them at their own game with online lending, right? So you have different strategic responses to how do you want to compete with 1,000 mice. But the integrator point of view is important because fundamentally, integration doesn't mean you've outsourced your talent. All it means is, just like you would do in normal course of business, integration still requires a lot of work to be done internally to make these experiences seamless. So I'll take an example that's not your industry, just for argument's sake. If you take health, digital health, there is thousands, literally thousands of companies that have taken pinpoint solutions. So you have like a lantern that does mental health and chronic depression prevention through telemedicine and a coach, like a video Skype kind of a thing, and then has many other things. And they have these little niches, right? But there's nobody that's providing an end-to-end digital health platform that integrates this. Now the integration actually is a massive piece of work, and it just requires a different reskilling of your internal talent. So I think the Accenture position is, you actually might have more work for your people internally. It's just different kind of work. And what they have to understand is there's equal pride in being a seamless integrator of a user experience as opposed to cracking one specific scientific or innovation problem. And that's an ego issue, or I didn't build it here kind of an issue, as opposed to a workforce volume issue. Does that?
To me, I'm fairly strongly of the view that it's a mix of the two. It's like you need fresh blood. Fresh blood gets a certain energy, gets a certain new perspective on it. I have zero doubt about that, and you have to be deliberate about where you pick your fresh blood. But at the same time, you have to be respectful of some of the things that you have in the business. I was joking about Argos and the catalog and the pen, etc. But there are a lot of things that have been done for 40 years extremely well on that. For example, with the catalog, we've tried a variety of formats over the past 3 years that could try to improve to bring it to the next level. And some are really evolving, but there is a strength in the catalog itself. Every time I go to a focus group, I'm amazed by the number of customers who are telling me, like, is that focus group about getting rid of the catalog? Because we'll kill you if you get rid of that. My kid need that for Christmas. They need the toy section, more toys, more paper on it. So I think there is a respect really of the two, while at the same time in our studios, for example, with teams that have done a phenomenal job, and it's an incumbent team, of reshaping that and becoming digital studios and then starting to monetize the studios on the back of it, and starting to think about how can we do something big on the back of that. So I think it's really a mix. It's really a mix of the two, but being very deliberate about which ones.
Great, thank you. Next question, please. The lady over there, please.
Thank you. I'm Camila Lobo Guerrero. I work for Edgewell Personal Care in commercial strategy. And my question is, how do you avoid risking partnering with the wrong startup when the disruption is emerging? So there's plenty of people who are disrupting the personal care business. How do you know which one to go with? Because you might select the one that actually is not the best runner-up later on. But you don't want to engage too late when you are in a weaker position.
Yeah, I mean, Bertrand, you've picked quite a few. I mean, is there a golden rule in terms of how do you actually pick those that you might think would be winners?
Well, it's an interesting way, even the way you frame the question, because it feels like almost being afraid of picking some wrong. So you need to have a process where it's fine that you pick some wrong. And I think someone was talking about earlier about failing miserably on quite a few, as long as you end up picking the right one. That would be helpful at the end. But I don't know. I think that's a job of the team. That's a job of the people you bring on board to effectively do that. Again, to me, I'm boring on that point, but I come back to what are we really, really, really trying to do? What is it? What is our objective? What fits with our assets? Where do we have a shot at doing something really at scale? And then picking the startups that are effectively in that setup. The cost of failure, you can minimize it as well. It's like that's why we do test and learns. That's why we do small samples. eBay, for example, in our case, could have never worked, but that's why we took 50 merchants before now taking more than 200 million now. But we took a small subset at first to get a sense quickly of what works, what doesn't work on that.
I would add to what Bertrand said. I would say there's no way to guarantee. I mean, that's the nature of the beast. The nature of the beast is you will fail some of the time. Hopefully you will, because that means you're pushing the envelope a little bit. But there's two or three very simple tests. So from the startup side, I think you can scan for technology risk and scalability and things like that. These things are pretty binary. You can do performance testing. You can do a couple of this and that. You can do reference customer checks. You can't always test for business model risk, because sometimes the startup isn't far enough along to know if there's actually a scalable business model, or is it just a novelty thing which people are temporarily paying for, like paid downloads in mobile 5 years ago, almost non-existent today. You can test for founder reputation, but that just means that you have to have somebody that's very close to the street and knows that that founder actually has got this reputation or that reputation, and that just takes, quite frankly, decades to be in the forest with those people to understand who's doing that. You can test for viability of the company, which is look at their investors and see, are these the kind of investors that will follow on the follow-on round? So there's many tests you can do to de-risk, but Bertrand's point is right. You will fail, no matter how much de-risking you do, and do you have a process that can withstand that?
I have an example in mind, which is, 3D printing, for example. When I started, I was extremely excited about, I still am, by 3D printing, but especially for our business, I saw it's a bet more than anything else, and it doesn't have to be a big bet, but I could really see a world in 10 years from now when I close my eyes on, instead of click and collect, you'll get click and print. It makes total sense. You're ordering something, you get it right away. Why would you even go to a store having home delivery? And it cuts a lot of the chain that we, both online players and us, basically have to that. Now, it hasn't moved as fast as I was hoping, and it's still very slow, it's still more costly than we think, it's not mainstream the way it is. But the way we thought about it was more about, can we afford ourselves not to at least do a test in case it picks up on that front? Then it didn't pick up as fast as we were hoping, but at least we know the space, and with people who inside the business know the space on the back of that.
Great, thank you. Next question.
Hi, Nick Kerrigan. I drive innovation for Barclaycard. First of all, Bertrand, all credit to you and the team about, just from a purely customer perspective, how you've transformed HRG and Argos over the last few years. One thing I'm really interested in is how you've delivered a seamless customer experience, and what were the biggest challenges you've had to overcome in terms of doing it? Because the amount of flexibility you can have now in that Argos environment is incredible and probably market leading.
I think it's a great question. I find that one of the toughest questions that we all have to wrestle with one way or the other. I mean, if I'm very candid, the way we led the transformation, you can go incrementally, step by step. My sense is at the stage where we needed something that was more drastic than that to reshape all the stuff I mentioned. It needed really an electroshock on that. The drawback of that is you're really at risk of compromising the customer experience by adding more complexity or by having you're moving so fast, and you're also in the cycle of peaks where your year is really 7 months before then you get into peak cycles afterwards. But if you don't land it before peak, then you miss basically another 5 months, and then you find an excuse afterwards, and then you never launch. So you have tough choices to make on that, with the risk of breaking some of the journeys on the way. I think last year we really made a very deliberate choice, and every organization will have their ways, but to put general managers. So we extracted 5 key guys from the organization. We now have now 6, but we call them GM of the end-to-end experiences. We picked 5 key areas that are absolutely core to what we do, like click and collect, like fast-track delivery, that's same-day proposition, 2-man, which is for big, bulkier proposition, our stock proposition, because it's one of our key assets. And those guys are very brave, because some of them were leading 100, 200 people team, and they've come to lead really from a matrix point of view without having many people reporting to them. But then to really be in charge and shining the lights on all the areas where the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand because we're moving fast. But I think it's a guardian of allowing us to keep moving fast while at the same time ensuring that we get that. The thing I'm probably most proud of is now that we've fully launched same-day delivery in 95% of the country on the back of those hubs. That was a massive endeavor in terms of what needed to be changed. But the figure I'm most proud about is the NPS at which those guys have been able actually to drive the experience. We talk about innovation, but also to me it's not just about a tech team or digital teams or others, it's the way that the store ops team has been iterating. I think throughout peak they made 28 changes over the course of 2 months, fundamental changes to keep adjusting the experience on the back of that. The speed of that to me is very healthy, because it really means we care, we have a compass about the type of NPS we want to get. Once you have the type of NPS, you know you can invest massively from a marketing point of view, even without doing the math. And then once you have that, you know you're really on good shape and you can keep cranking pretty hard.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much indeed for this discussion. I think it was most enlightening. So thanks, and thanks to the questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.